This is Bruce Wayne, our pastel Batman ball python, and we've actually had Bruce since 2014, and he's sired some awesome babies and some awesome clutches over the years for us, and he's finally ready for retirement, or for his retirement enclosure. So today we're going to take you along setting up his enclosure for the future. Ball pythons are one of the easiest snakes to keep, and in general they thrive well under very basic conditions. But sometimes if the conditions are not right for the animal, they won't do as well, and the general well-being of the snake is not going to be good. So today we're going to actually set up a enclosure for our pastel Batman Bruce. So here we've got a 1.2 meter by 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters enclosure, and this is actually a perfect size for an adult ball python. I think this is adequate for an hatchling ball python up to an adult snake. So basically what you're going to need to set up this enclosure is you're going to need, of course, the enclosure itself. You can either use PVC, a glass terrarium, or even a wooden cage. And of course you're going to need a heat pad, which is going to go on the one side of the enclosure, a thermostat which is going to connect to the heat pad in order to regulate the temperatures of the enclosure itself. Then we're going to need some sort of substrate. You can either use cocoa husk like we are using here, or you could actually use something completely different like wood chips or whatever you want to use. And of course then we're going to need the decorations for the cage. So we've got some cork tubes here which we're going to incorporate in the cage today. Then we've got some plastic plants which we're also going to incorporate in the cage today, just to give some more volume. And then of course we've got a water ball. We've got actually here's a rock water ball, and then we're actually going to place a hide also into the enclosure. So we've got a few options here today to try out. We're going to see which is going to work the best in the enclosure and see how the setup is itself. So now for assembling everything and putting everything inside the cage. Here we've got, so what we actually did is we actually put the heat pad down here on the bottom, and what you guys can see is we made sure that the heat tape is actually quite stable down here. We used some tape just to put it down. We did put the probe here on the heat pad itself. We're just going to experiment first with it before we actually try and put it on top of the surface. I just want to see where the temperatures are roughly at, but always make sure that your heat or your probe is somewhat either sticked on the heat tape itself or on top of the substrate, because if it actually doesn't feel the heat of the tape itself, it could actually measure the ambient temperature and your thermostat can spike abnormally high. So let's start with the bolt of the enclosure. So because Bruce is quite a big snake, we're going to give him a nice size water ball. So this is basically just a ceramic water ball, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to put it on the side where the heat is, where the heat tape isn't. So we're actually going to put it here on the cold side. We're just going to add the water ball, maybe move the substrate a bit and add it to the corner here. Then for the choice of hide, we're going to actually also we've got an option for 2 hides for Bruce. So this is a bit of a smaller hide, might be a bit small for him, but what we're going to do is we're actually going to incorporate this also into the enclosure. Then he's got a choice between whichever hide he feels comfortable. Sometimes ball pythons actually prefer smaller hides because they feel more secure in a safer environment. So for now we're actually just going to place this hide not on the heat side, between the cool side and the heating side, where he's got enough space actually to thermoregulate. That's also very important, that the enclosure, that the ball python is able to thermoregulate between the cage itself. This is a very big hide, but I think Bruce will actually enjoy this hide a lot. So we're going to place this right over the heat pad here. So now we can see we've got the water ball, we've got one hide, and we've actually got a bigger hide. So he's got a choice between any of these 2 hides. Then now to add some more volume to the cage, let's put one of these cork tubes. Let's see where it's going to fit the best. Let's put one maybe here at the cord side. And then we can use the smaller one, let's say something like, you can position these tubes and cork tubes however you want. We're just trying to see which is the best fitting. And in terms for the plants or the fake plants, I think let's put one in the corner here. And what we can do actually, if we see he moves it around and the foliage and the plants are not staying in the same direction or the same place, we can actually take some tape or whatever and just tape it down to make sure it's extra secure. And then I think the last one we're going to try and put here on this cork tube. Well, you can actually add anything into the enclosure as long as there's no sharp edges or anything which can hurt the animal. So we're actually just going to add 1 or 2 rocks in here just to give it a bit of a more of a perspective and giving it that natural look. So now guys, now we've actually finished up setting up the enclosure. This is actually one of the first steps to actually setting or moving the ball python from its previous enclosure, which is a racking system, into this enclosure. So now that we are actually finished up setting up the enclosure, putting everything inside what we're going to need for Bruce, this is actually step 1 of actually 3 of transitioning him into this enclosure. So because Bruce was actually raised up since a hatchling in a racking system, a change like this can be quite stressful for him. So what we're going to do is, firstly, we're going to actually change his current setup first. We're going to add some cocoa husk to his enclosure. We're going to perhaps add an hide and some plastic plants into his current enclosure, that he gets used to having different hides and different actually scents and feels in the enclosure itself. Once Bruce has gotten used to the hide and we can see he's actually using the hide and he's getting used to that setup, we're going to slowly but surely transition him into this enclosure, but we're not going to put him right away in this big enclosure. Firstly, we're going to put this divider inside the enclosure, and we're actually going to add Bruce to the one side here where the heat is. This is also just going to be a transitioning phase. As soon as we see Bruce is feeding and he's doing well on the one side of the enclosure, slowly but surely we can actually open up the enclosure and Bruce can go to the other side as he please. So it's very important, especially from going from a natural or from a racking system to a more naturalistic system, the transition needs to be slow. We don't want to stress the animal out. We want to actually make sure the transition period is as safe and as best as possible. So that's our recommendation, to slowly but surely make them used to the environment. Okay guys, so we just changed Bruce's current cage a bit. So all what we did is, for the time being, we actually took one of the hides which we're going to use in his enclosure and one of the plastic plants. We just actually also added to his current enclosure, and we actually have him currently on cocoa husk. So Bruce has actually been on paper and on cocoa husk in the past. He does well on both, but because we're going to put him in a naturalistic setup quite soon, we thought let's put him on cocoa husk. So this will be Bruce's last couple of days in this enclosure. As you guys can see, already look how he's smelling, and right away he's going to the hide box. So we'll keep you guys updated on Bruce's progress.